Hey there, cats and kitties. I'm the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Series 9, Episode 6 of Doctor Who, The Woman Who Lived. And very much, sort of as I figured it would be, this episode was much less a second half to a two-parter, as it was following the story of Ashildr, the immortal Ashildr, as she's become Maisie Williams' character, and it gave me just a lot of what I was hoping for in the interactions and the conversations, the character dynamics between the Doctor and, of course, the Lady Me, as she refers to herself this many hundreds of years later. Just tons of fun was this episode. I enjoyed it almost entirely. There were a couple of small little clunky bits here and there, kind of like the last episode, much less in this episode than the last episode. Most notably kind of the debut of the character of Sam Swift when he first makes his debut in the episode. I wasn't really feeling that sequence. And a couple small bits like that, but apart from that, this episode from beginning to end, I was just riveted because largely it was kind of almost the same paradigm as you had between, Davros and the Doctor, I felt, in that you really get the gravitas behind, the Ashildr character having spent all this time on her own. She's never given anyone sort of the reward of that immortality-making device, and I was actually quite shocked as the Doctor's reading over her sort of diaries, and much as I speculated, they became very similar. They are almost the same kind of aesthetic, like Time Lady-esque. So much of this episode, I almost felt could have paralleled what might happen if the Doctor eventually reunites with Susan, for example. And I wonder if Peter Capaldi has been very much mindful of that, because in Precursor to Series 9, he's, sort of name-dropped Susan, both in character and out of character a few times. And, that'd be something that'd be gangbusters to see Susan back in the fray at some point. But I thought it was very interesting, like the dynamic. It's very much an almost fatherly or grandfatherly dynamic with her, being concerned with this immortality she is now cursed with. She sees it, much as I speculated, with all this time losing children and all this kind of stuff, and family and, husbands and significant others, whatever it is. She's explored so much of life, but she has time and time and time again lost. And that has been the underwriting factor of all. And so she does kind of start skirting that malevolence that I, thought was foreshadowed toward the end of the previous episode. And, kind of making, a pact with this crashed lion dude and everything. The Eye of Hades, or Eyes of Hades, whatever it was, this jewel, which kind of reminded me of, like, at least in the similarity of name, Eye of Harmony, something that calls back to Doctor Who's past, of course. And the idea that this would effectively siphon the life energy out of something, or utilize the death energy, if you will, in the dying moments of someone's, final moments, it would harness that to open this portal. And it's interesting how we see the color aesthetic is actually purple, and the Doctor comments purple, the, color of death. And then when they kind of, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the episode, when it turns out, Ashildr uses that other immortality-making device to save the life of Sam Swift, which that whole sequence toward the end of the episode, when he's doing kind of the stand-up routine, gallows humor, as he calls it, which is very befitting of the scenario, and the well-hung reference, like, I'm surprised that got in there, made me chuckle, I laughed my ass off. But when they are actually bringing him back from the brink and closing this portal that has thus been opened before we see Lion Dude vaporized, it turns orange, and the Doctor calls it the color of immortality. What was the first thing the 12th Doctor did when he sort of snapped to, after his, post-regeneration, that whole thing, to the inside of the TARDIS? He changed it from sort of a blue, an aquamarine blue, turquoise blue-ish, and even royal blue around the sort of roundels, to an orange. And it's interesting that, because the Doctor was very much heard to speculate in the early days of this incarnation, could it be sort of a new immortality, a sense of immortality, because of what the Time Lords bestowed upon him in thanks for bringing Gallifrey back. That new regeneration cycle, a lot have, fans have speculated that maybe this is something more than just the traditional regeneration cycle. Maybe there's no more limit. And that could be interesting if it's sort of, hallmarked by the Doctor's changing of the desktop format within the TARDIS, that kind of thing. I just thought that was very interesting that he calls out that particular color as that of immortality, and it coincides with the color inside the TARDIS now. I think my favorite aspects amidst the sort of robbery and everything, the whole robbing aspect was actually pretty comical, and I loved when they're up in like the chimney and everything, they're trying to hide. But all of that dialogue back and forth about what Ashildr's been through, what Lady Mia's been through, you know, the name she has chosen for herself. Again, so much of that just felt very much weighty, and the gravitas of like, you know, a situation of the Doctor coming back with Susan, and why did you leave me so many years ago, and this is what I've been through, and, you know, in this case, they kind of have a deus ex machina, you know, to explain she's immortal, and she could choose someone to, you know, travel that journey with her and all this kind of stuff. It's not quite the same dynamic, but I think they really went above and beyond in exploring the themes you might if you saw the reunification of, you know, Doctor and granddaughter respectively. And there were things in this episode, like I loved the reference to the Visitation. I think it's a Fifth Doctor serial, you know, the Fires of London or whatever it was, the Pteroleptals. That was actually a serial that spawned my very first Great Companions Who Never Were video. Go check those out. I have a whole playlist of those if you want to check them out. And I have a couple more I'm thinking about eventually getting around to as of the time of this recording. We shall see. But I also loved, you know, a lot of the sort of comedy bits in this particular story that worked for me were very reminiscent of things in Classic Who. The most notable one for me that came to mind was The Reign of Terror, a First Doctor serial where, especially, there's this whole sequence, if you've never seen it, in one of the episodes, basically it's taking place during the French Revolutionary era of France, and the TARDIS team, if you will, Ian, Barbara, and, you know, the First Doctor, Susan, they are all split up, and it's looking pretty dire for the lot of them. The Doctor is kind of left behind, and he kind of has to make his way on foot all the way to France, and he's hoping to run into them again and everything like that. He encounters on this footpath journey a sort of chain gang overseen by this big burly dude and everything, and he kind of smart mouths this guy and ends up getting himself into trouble. Like, this guy's like, well, you know what, you start digging holes and everything like that, and eventually the Doctor's like, look, I can't stay holed up here. I got to do something to get back on my quest, you know, to find my TARDIS companions. And he ends up faking this like foreman, this chain gang foreman, out with a gold piece or sovereign or whatever it is that he, you know, supposedly finds as he's digging up in the ground. He gets this guy down on all fours looking for more gold, and then he clocks him over the back of the head with a shovel and moves on his merry way as all the other guys like take off running in the other direction, whatever it is. That kind of humor, you know, I think would surprise some people to know that Classic Who, even going back to the Hartnell-Troughton era, especially Troughton, but even contained within the Hartnell era, the First Doctor era, there are some really funny and, you know, just classic moments that are on par with the kinds of things you see in modern Who. And I loved it. I loved it for that. That whole vibe, you know, all the way through this episode, the place setting, the time period it was taking place in, and all those little comedic nods and everything like that. Like I say, with the exception of Sam Swift, that character's debut in the episode, which didn't really work for me, everything else, all of the humor, like of them creeping around this house and waking up the sort of master of the house, the, you know, the father, presumably, they followed the daughter back and everything like that, who was quite a looker, by the way. But I loved how the Doctor and Ashildr, Lady Me, came together and all this kind of stuff, and how they ended up affecting, you know, the saving of Sam Swift. Here was a character I wasn't that impressed with, and then when he starts doing that gallows humor stand-up routine toward the end of it, I was like, I like this guy. This guy's pretty cool. I could actually do a Great Companions Who Never Were on him. If not Ashildr, you know, Lady Me herself. I'm going to keep calling her both of those things. But in any effect, you know, it was just a brilliant, fun episode for me, even with those few little aspects that I felt were a little clunky. Again, holding over from the previous episode where there was much more clunky. As much as I enjoyed that episode, and I still, you know, it's not something that was without problems, but it was not by any stretch of the imagination anything horrible. This episode I felt was a step up from all those comedy things that I didn't feel worked in the previous episode. And we kind of leave off, I love the name drop of Captain Jack talking about, having traveled with someone who's immortal, and, the doctor's basically like, he'll catch up to you, at some point. And there's this whole overarching mystery with, Maisie's character about how does she know about the doctor. Now, of course, we know that throughout the course of history, things like Torchwood and one of the queens and everything like that, who has had run-ins with the doctor. There's just been so many people across history that have probably mentioned run-ins with the doctor. And you can probably find tapestries and texts that feature the TARDIS. We've seen hints and glimpses of this before. So it's not by any grand stretch of the imagination that Maisie's character would kind of piece it together that he does leave in the aftermath of the explosion, as he says. But then things take sort of a turn. If you call back to, I think it was one of the prologues to the first, episodes of Series 9, where basically the doctor was on Karn and he was trying to hide out. There was some dialogue back and forth between the head priestess of Karn talking about enemies and friends and who is, sort of more befitting and better in the long run to keep in your company, and a watchful eye. And this led back to Missy, which was somewhat of a surprise, in the first episode of Series 9. And we had sort of almost parroting the entire dialogue between Maisie's character and the doctor toward the end of this. And suddenly, like, with the way the doctor's reacting to it, I'm almost like, is this a suggestion of where, Ashildr eventually goes? Or who she eventually comes into contact with and is either manipulated by or working in concert with? Because he pointedly asks her, are we enemies now? And he's asked that of Missy. I don't think they are actually daring to go so far as to suggest that this is like the earliest manifestation of the Master. We've seen flashbacks going back to Gallifrey. He was a child and all that kind of stuff. But it did seem to hint, failing that, which would make no sense whatsoever, that she must be somehow in league with the Master, with Missy, because of how closely paralleled that dialogue was. And that kind of took me for a loop. I was like, wow, because of course you see Clara finally, this was like a Clara Light episode basically, and when she is returned, you're reunited with the Doctor at the end of the episode. Loved, by the way, the sonic shades, the guitar, rock and roll Doctor, yes, but when she finally enters the fray, we had sort of two things that stood out to me. One, of course, is the student she's talking about who took the selfie, and there we see Maisie's character in the background, looming, sort of watching over Clara very malevolently once again. And this kind of calls back to the dynamic of how Clara ever met the Doctor in the first place, the woman in the shop, Missy, and all this kind of stuff. It seems like there is some sort of grand design going on there. The Moff has in the works, it seems like it's going to come full circle, and it just is a matter of seeing how it's going to play out, because you have that foreshadowing aesthetic with the dialogue of Maisie's character talking about everyone becomes smoke. They are lost in the fray. The wind blows them away, and we are forever immortal. We forever move on with, the flow of time. And to have these two things coming together, because if you're paying attention, there's one shot of Clara and the Doctor from behind as they're talking about where are we going to go next within the TARDIS. And there's like a wisp of smoke or whatever it is, steam behind Clara, specifically behind her, that I took note of. And this is like coinciding with that revelation of Ashildr being there watching, and with the dialogue we just got in the previous scene, matching so much that between the Doctor and the Priestess of Karn, which eventually led to the revelation he's talking about Missy all along. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Missy has kept her eye on Clara from the start. And it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this culminates with that knowledge of Jenna Coleman's having left Doctor Who. how that is all going to play out with her character is going to be very much, keeping me on the edge of my seat to see. And so yeah, I mean, this episode, with the exception of one or two sequences that just didn't work for me, the entire rest of it I loved. I was glued to it. I could not, stop watching it. I was watching with bated breath and excitement and chuckling along with it, and just, the excitement of it. I think one of my small gripes in, sort of falling alongside the clunky aspects, as I say, is the villain, the baddie, the lion guy. I kind of wish we could have seen maybe more of his character, maybe have more development of his character and or species and all of that. I feel like it was just sort of debuted all too quickly, and then, the problems there that erupted all too quickly were then snuffed out all too quickly. I didn't feel like, it was kind of like a blink and you'll miss it villain. Sort of, you could see it coming, that this guy's going to turncoat on her, and it's not going to work out. The doctor's already telling her that's what's probably going to happen, and as a viewer, that's probably what's going to happen. But I kind of wish we had a little more uncertainty there. I kind of wish we had a little more depth to that particular villain. But apart from that, I loved it. I loved this episode, and I can't wait for the next. I think we might be heading into another two-parter with Zygons and everything like that. Osgood's back for all intents and purposes, I guess, kind of, sort of. Don't know how that happened. People are saying timey-wimey. People are saying, oh, it's the Zygon duplicate. People are, this, that, and the other thing. It's going to be amazing and fun to see what it is. I do like her character, and I was, disappointed when she was killed off. But, it'll be interesting to see what exactly is going on as the sort of walls are breaking down in the piece that was seemingly achieved in the 50th and everything. And so yeah, I'm on board. Classic villains are always awesome in Doctor Who, and I hope they're a little bit more impressive, as we were left with the 50th. But yeah, so bring it on. Love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of Series 9, Episode 6 of Doctor Who, The Woman Who Lived. If you were impressed as much as I was with it, with Maisie's performance, her character, the depth, and the dialogue between the Doctor and Ashildr, Lady Me, as she wanted to be called, and all the foreshadowing and all those elements that hint at a grander design, possibly with Missy, possibly leading toward the end of Clara, and all these kinds of things. Did it resound as much for you as it did for me? If not, why not? Let me know in the comments below. Whatever your POV happens to be, we can agree to disagree, and I just love having the conversation back and forth with you guys. So yeah, otherwise, it'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.